All right, we're going to get started. So, good morning, everybody. And first thing I want to say is I hope you know what you signed up for, because this is a bird of a feather session, which means we're going to wander around, we're going to ask questions, and we're going to hope that you also have questions or comments to make during the sessions, because that's the whole basis of birds of a feather. If we don't get your interaction, it's going to be really tough for us to have, I guess, a successful outcome of this session. So this session, increase agility and quality using trunk-based development in continuous delivery. Speaking with you today, me and Logan. Logan, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Logan Donley. So I'm a technical evangelist at CloudBees, and so what that really means is I work with our customers to figure out, really what the best kind of industry, the movements in our industry that are really going to help them benefit their business. So that's what I do.
Thank you. Hope Lynch, Senior Director of Platform at CloudBees. I am responsible for understanding voice of the customer, understanding our product vision, our product direction, giving input to sometimes our customers on how they can use our products more successfully. I have a background in product management, agile transformation, consultation, pretty much you name it in technology, I've done it at one point or another. So with that, let's roll through. Logan, I think you've got the first one.
Yeah. So since we're talking about trunk-based development, we want to start with just a little bit of background on the different branching strategies. So without a branching strategy in place, everything's a bit chaotic, right? We have merge hell, where it's like if Hope's writing some code, I'm writing some code, we're both trying to merge it into the main line. We can end up in a situation where we have a lot of conflicts and it just takes a lot of time. And so back in 2010, there was this idea called Git flow, which was created. And what Git flow is all about is moving kind of the main line from the main branch to a development branch. And so that means our main branch is always going to be stable, right? I can deploy that at any point in time and it's safe. And the approach is then we have this develop branch where everybody forks off of this or branches off of this, and they have their own feature branches. And so that works really nicely at large scale, but it's very complicated. You have feature branches, you have development branches, you have release branches, hotfix branches. It gets quite intense. And so when you try to do CI and CD, it just ends up really blowing up the amount of work you have to do. And so GitHub came along and said, all right, we like the ideas here, but we're going to build what's called GitHub Flow. Very creative. What they've done is they've basically removed all of the develop branch and the release branches. And so now the main branch is the main line. So everybody contributes basically branching off of main. They've got a feature branch, and then they'll merge it back in. And so with that, things are a lot more simplified. But the problem, of course, is then we have this situation where whenever I merge into main, I'm also deploying into production. And that's obviously not going to work for everyone. And so GitLab came along and kind of took the idea of GitHub Flow and then added the idea of environment-specific branches. And so you've got your main branch, which maps to a staging environment. You have the, let's say, production environment, which maps to a branch. And so you merge, it deploys. So that's nice. And who knows, maybe there's going to be a Bitbucket one, I don't know. But there's this other idea of trunk-based development, which is let's move away from individual branches. Everybody works off of the main line, or the main branch, but we have a very strict way that we operate to ensure that we don't have merge conflicts. And the way that you do that is you consistently push and pull code. You're not going to sit there where, Hope is going off, I'm going off, we've each got our own separate workflows, and we're keeping those lines separate for months on end. This is really the idea of, if any of you look to the actual definitions of continuous integration and all the rules kind of associated with it, one of them really is you should be contributing code back to your main branch essentially every day, maybe even multiple times a day. Think about CI, it's not the tooling, it's continuous integration. You're trying to take, Hope's code, my code, your code, all of this back into the same place so we all have a continuous context. And that's what trunk-based development is really good at. And we're going to go into it a bit more in how you can actually do this, but I think that's just going to set the stage here. And I think what we want to do next is just see, who here is actually doing trunk-based development. Going to show of hands. It's got a couple people.
Ooh.
Okay.
We have
Excellent.
questions.
Yeah.
So when you got to your organization, were they already doing trunk-based development, or did it transition while you were there? Ooh, they probably need the microphone. I just thought about that. We're gonna pick people because I saw who said, I saw who nodded.
Yeah, do we have a volunteer to go first?
Oh, those two guys on the left at the end, they look eager too, but we have an
got a
actual
volunteer.
volunteer, so they get a pass.
Yeah, I'm pretty new to this organization and inherited trunk-based development, but it's kind of like they're not deploying constantly, so it's kind of a mix.
Reason that they're not doing constant deployment?
They're just not in a
Or
position
we don't
to.
know where you
That's
work.
why
You
I'm
can
there,
speak freely.
trying to fix that.
Okay, that's awesome. So where you came from, was it trunk-based development at your prior organization?
No, it was more like the GitLab flow.
Okay, makes
Before,
sense.
yeah.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? I think I saw a couple of people on the other side saying that they were currently, yeah. Logan's going to get his steps in today.
Yeah, we use in a few projects or teams, not in the whole company. It's really a case team by team. Some teams have requirements, control requirements in their pipeline to actually do pull requests and have some sort of approval for some things that are related to money, too much money.
Man, but you can still
Some-
do it. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, some other teams like ours, I work in develop experience there. We can push directly to the main branch and just keep iterating through our team. Other teams prefer actually having pull request reviews into main and just release from there automatically as well. So there's a really large mix of where people are. Some people are actually not comfortable with trunk.
I have a follow-up question for you.
Sure.
So, is anyone in your organization using feature flags? Because I have a sneaking suspicion that sometimes trunk-based development is not used because people are worried about what goes live in production and how can I roll it back. But if you're using feature flagging, that eliminates part of that problem.
Some teams do use feature flags. We are just about implementing actually rollouts with Canary, AB, and Blue-Green. Mostly trying to do the Canary part of it first so we can affect a smaller set of customers. But it's still a work in progress. It's a very big, too many teams, and it's kind of hard to change the whole company at once.
How many people are you working with?
Probably 100-something engineers.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's going to be really cool once it gets completely rolled out. All right. Anyone else using trunk-based development currently? One more.
Yeah, I've been there for 4 years. We were using kind of a hybrid when I first got there. We were using develop as trunk, and then it'd be a move to master. And then we eventually went all to trunk-based. We're not CD, mostly because of resource constraints to get the testing up to snuff to be able to go that fast. But we have the tooling, most of the tooling in place. It's just a matter of getting the business processes and testing processes being capable of keeping up with it.
So when you say testing, I'm guessing you're not talking unit tests. Are you saying you still have a QA team?
Yeah, we still have a QA team. Most of the constraints have been on feature testing and stuff like that. Like unit testing is pretty up to snuff, but it doesn't catch enough to be able to depend on it. There's an effort to build out automated integration tests, but just haven't had enough resources to invest in it to get it there.
Sounds like you're heading in the right direction, though. Sounds like you're heading in the right direction. Okay, for those of you who did not raise your hands, it's very easy to see who that is now. Why are you not? Do you know why you're not using trunk-based development in your organization? Or do you know of some reasons why your organization is not, like you've actually heard the objections to it and why it's not currently in use? Okay.
So I'd say the main reason we don't do trunk-based, we do like short-lived feature branches, is that we do pull requests and reviews, right? So, and that's sort of my main concern about trunk is like base is like, when do people review it? So yeah, all of our PR, all of our, merges to our main branch are reviewed by teammates.
Oh, don't give him the microphone back yet. I have a follow-up question. So here's let's say my idealized perspective on that, right? If you have teams who are well-trained and you trust them, and you have a rollback strategy, why do you need PRs?
So it's not that we don't trust
Okay.
people on the team. It's that we want sort of like situational awareness about what's happening in the code base. And so, and I'll admit, like I personally don't look at that many PRs, but like it's good to just sort of know what's changing where, even if you're like, there's a lot of trust in the team, right? If you want to merge your PR yourself, you can do it. But really, I would say like there's a perception of situational awareness that like you want to know what's going on, and PRs are a way of like sort of pinging you to say like, hey, this thing's changing over there.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Add to that. I think that's technically still trunk-based development like if you go to trunkbaseddevelopment.org or whatever it is, they have a scaled trunk-based development, which is exactly that. It's short-lived. It's like, you don't have people sitting next to you so they can't code review directly, but you spin up a pull request and then they'll look at that. It kicks off your CI job, all that good stuff. But they still consider that like trunk-based and not, going out of the whole methodology there. So
Okay, so then I guess
yeah, still might qualify, yeah.
For us, once it hits, it goes all the way out to, it goes through staging, integration testing automatically and into production. So.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, cool. On the way. Anyone else? Comments about your current branching strategies?
Has anybody evaluated it and decided that it's just not for them? That it just seems too risky or anything like that?
This is a conversation. We just jump in where we see an opportunity. So yeah.
That's always been my main question. Like, we're actually in the middle of a pretty big re-architecture of our repo, so it's pretty major changes. And if you just merge that into the trunk and then it goes through the pipeline and it's all screwed up for whatever reason, how do you unscrew that? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's something that everybody handles a bit differently. So I was doing a lot of research on the official trunk-based development methodology. And one of the things they say is basically the two tenets of trunk-based development are always be released already. So if Hope comes to me and says, hey, you got to release this right now, it's like, all right, whatever's in main, just push it. The other one is just don't break the build. So basically never, like their whole idea is just you should never merge something in that causes an issue. And so if you do, you should have a CI job in place that will see that like main branch, the test broke, and it'll just roll it back and back out the change automatically. So yeah.
So relying on your like PR checks or that pipeline before it
Exactly.
actually gets merged in.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay.
Yeah, and I will say, years back, I was on a team where we made a sudden decision to move in that direction. I can't tell you the number of things that blew up over the first few months, and it was a scramble and it was stressful. But all of the lessons learned while we went through that, and we tested it initially, of course, on a very small team of about 8 to 10 people. But once we got through it, and we learned what the patterns were, and we learned what our processes should be, and a lot of it was down to team agreements, right? You come down with your team agreements on the Agile team. When am I going to do X, Y, and Z? Who do I need to check in with? It turned out that everyone was able to work a lot faster, and we got code shipped quicker. Now, it still didn't help that we had one rogue cowboy on the team who just kind of did whatever he wanted, and when the red light went on, we usually knew it was him. But overall, it was definitely a good move. Anyone else? Anyone feel that trunk-based development just probably would not fly in your organization? You're not doing it now. You don't see that in the future. And keep in mind, we don't know where you work. And there are reasons why it's not in the future for your group.
I mean, I'm not exactly sure, but it's definitely not something we're talking about on a regular basis. I do know in our organization that we do a lot of basically like, rather than skill-based hiring, we do capability-based hiring, and we do lots of training and ongoing education. And so I think there is, and we're a very like risk-averse, very, very risk-averse organization. And so I think there's a lot of ideas that like you have to have certain reviews and other things in place because we have such a wide range of people who might be like just starting, never coded before, right, are learning how to do it, but are involved in the processes versus people who are really experienced, who we do trust to send things out. But there's kind of that aspect as well where we're using all of these processes as educational opportunities too for employees. So that combined with risk, I think, is a big factor of why we don't talk about this very much.
And of course, I have a follow-up question. So I'm going to say a dreaded thing. If you have tomatoes, eggs, stones, please do not throw them. Has anyone in your organization talked about, for the newer people, pairing them up with someone until they feel that they're at the right level? Because that would help with some of the risk mitigation.
For sure, yeah, but it's kind of team-based and based on kind of what different teams and how different managers approach it. So there's a lot of difference, right, between teams and projects of how that
makes sense. All right, great, thank you. I appreciate that. So wide variety in different organizations. We've talked through pros and cons. We're having a technical issue. We are having a, you know what, I'm just going to stick with this slide because it's going bananas. But so for trunk-based development, based on what we have talked about, is there anyone who now thinks maybe you are doing some form of it in your organization, but you just didn't really think that you were doing trunk-based development? I think his hand is sort of up, so yeah. But here's my soapbox comment on that. Not necessarily on that, but on trunk-based development in itself. For a team that is looking at time to market, shipping quickly, and I think honestly, especially if you have small teams, if you have just a few people assigned to get something done, and they can ship quickly on their own. They can roll back if something blew up or something doesn't look quite the way it should, and they can do that on their own. Now you've taken a team of maybe 5 or 10 people, and they can function like a team of maybe 30 or 40 people because of the speed at which they can deploy and get the code out the door. So if you are in an organization where the conversation comes up that you're resource constrained, well, we can't do that because we don't have enough people. Looking at trunk-based development actually could be one of the solutions. You may not need more people. You just may need to change your processes and your branching strategies. How do we, let's see. I'm going to see if I can look and see if there are questions. I'm going to turn that off because we might have some questions from people who are dialed in. Let me look and see if I can find it. I had it up. But in the meantime, Logan, if you have any questions for anybody.
Yeah, so for those of you that are using trunk-based development, like, I'm just curious about your tool stack, if there's anything that has proved challenging with implementing. I mean, it's pretty similar to the other Git flow and all that, but it does present some challenges of just, depending on if you're actually releasing and deploying off of the merge into main versus having like sometimes people just use a quick release branch whenever they want to deploy. So depending on how you set that up, you could have some sort of challenges there. So I'm just curious, has anybody like for those of you who have are using trunk-based development, have you had any sort of challenges with tools, or has it been pretty straightforward?
I guess like what I'm gonna say actually applies to any flow you use, and there are challenges, especially when you use applications with database or anything that actually change over time. So your application really needs to be prepared to actually roll back or move forward or change over time, be able to run at the same time with your new version as well. So those all are complications that if you're not really, if your pipeline's not mature enough to fail fast and safe, like it doesn't matter that much like which flow you're using. It's probably where you should put the time there. And for the whole merge straight to main, which some of our teams do, it's really like we do something very unconventional once in a while. We do like mobbing sessions. Get everyone in the same room and just talk about the code and start coding and see what's going on. And there's no approval there. And it feels like you're wasting time sometimes, but you're not actually. You're learning something, you're exchanging ideas. So also interesting for if you want to try bits of it early and get 3 or 4 engineers in the same call and merge it straight. See if your pipeline is actually mature enough, or even if you have like database migrations, do you actually test your database migrations? Do you actually be able to quickly roll back or quickly fail in 5% of your requests and stuff like that, right? So there's a lot of things you can do in your pipeline to make it mature enough that whatever flow you use, it's just gonna work.
Absolutely. So a few of the comments that have come in, not really any questions, but the one that made me laugh a little bit from Matheus, we are trying here, GitFlow is dragging us. So that's great. But a lot of the comments I think are in line. Edward, they switched from GitFlow to Trunk a few years back. Some in the organization that want to go back, but the pipeline was extremely complicated. Basically, like you had mentioned, Logan, the coordination that's required if you're not doing Trunk is a lot. Comments on PRs needed from some audit compliance. Yes, so, basically trust but verify from Joel. Let's see, Joel, in addition, by doing PRs, you can feed metadata to the lifecycle of that change. For example, approvals cascade through CI/CD, additional deploy metadata, etc. That is also a good point. Process is up to the development team, and the process is standardized, and more importantly, document it. The least favorite thing in any organization. We've got to write it all down and make it so someone else can find it and actually understand it. And having a standardized and well-documented process to catch up with the growth of the dev company's community. So, but that's another piece with this. I know, again, talking about the team I was with when we made the sudden shift, we found out really quickly how insufficient our documentation was and how much was not written down that would be needed for us to move that quickly. How many meetings we had to go in and have a discussion about what the process actually should be, because now the world is very different. What should we do instead? It took a lot of meetings. There were a lot of complaints from a lot of people who said, I'm in this meeting, I could be writing code. And some people who just wanted to be heads down all day and not have a conversation with anyone, that was really tough for them. But once we got through it, they were able to spend more time heads down versus having so many meetings. So that did work well. Well, thank you, Joel. Documentation is always the hardest. In any way that that can be automated a bit, definitely is a help. Any other thoughts or questions on trunk-based development? Any observations that you have that you want to bring in?
I am the third engineer on a team of 3 engineers. Great. We moved to like something akin to trunk-based development, still using GitHub PRs because security, etc. One issue I've noticed is that it seems like the thing that trunk-based development is trying to do is reduce the risk of conflict from diverging branches, right? So that still requires like getting PRs approved and not letting them live for weeks, which sometimes happens. But I'll say the thing that really like made us move towards always be ready to release from main was just that like now the process of deploying a feature and deploying a fix because we noticed a bug that made it to production and we can fix it in 5 minutes is exactly the same. So it's like somehow less things to document in terms of all those processes and whatnot.
Absolutely. And that's not an outcome that most people would actually anticipate.
This is the first time that I hear about TrunkBased development, but I believe I would like to hear what are your advices that you didn't find out there in Google.
Oh, well, I think I've probably talked about the pieces that we didn't find out. Just the amount of dedication you have to see it through, really. You have to be committed to the process and the outcomes. Also, you may need to streamline your tooling. That was one of the things we actually did have to do. There were a lot of people using a lot of things that just did not work with the flow that we were trying to do. You don't have to take away the independence of choice that people have, but the process has to be similar enough that if someone doesn't come to work one day or they leave or, whatever, someone else can look at and say, you know what, I get what was going on here, or maybe read the documentation and understand it. Some folks, and again, I'm going to say, if you got a cowboy on your team, like the guy with the red light we had, a lot of it was, he basically said, you know what, I see what we're doing here. I'm going to do a little bit of it, but everything else, I'm just going to do it my way, which basically was a lot like the old way we were doing it. So that caused a lot of complications. You really do have to have buy-in from the team so that everyone is really working together on it. You can have an individual deploy, but not to the detriment of what everyone else is doing. I don't know if you had anything to add, Logan.
Yeah, so I guess the other thing is if you get lucky and you have a greenfield project, that's the perfect time to start. If there's a new team, you have a brand new project, it's like set things up right from the start and you won't have all those problems. So, but that's a rare occurrence. So just, yeah.
Sure, for sure. And yes.
What about merge or rebase, for example, if you have some kind of guidelines for every feature or every fix should have only one commit or multiple commits? Or?
I don't think there's anything super specific on number of commits, but there is a TrunkBased, TrunkBasedDevelopment.org or something. It has like 1 million different pages that give a bunch of advice going like 30 years back, but it's, yeah, I think really the key is just making sure that as many times per day you're pulling and syncing your local from the remote. That way, when a coworker commits something, you have that locally. You're not going to have a merge conflict. So that's one of the best practices.
I have a comment here from Steve. If your team is using PRs, it is worth checking the time it takes for PRs to be approved to ensure no team member is waiting longer than any other. I had a team where one developer was looking really slow, but they were waiting 3 times longer for PRs to be approved. So yeah, having something that alerts you that PRs are sitting and getting stale is definitely important. Joel says, as a manager or leader, I usually look to these metrics as gauge to investigate issues versus labeling engineers as slow. We should be looking at scenarios like this and figuring out why. For example, an issue I had like this turned out we had resources in Serbia. When they worked, it was essentially our early hours. Their PRs were lost in the morning hours. And that is a great observation. The team I had at that time, the majority were in the US. We had 2 in the Czech Republic and 1 in Germany, but we were working similar enough hours that it wasn't a concern, but I imagine if you have a team that's globally distributed and everyone is working different hours, making sure those PRs aren't sitting there and getting stale for the people who maybe are working opposite hours of you, definitely would need a process. So definitely thank you, Steve and Joel, for that input. All right, yes.
Hey, I'm sorry, I came in late and caught the tail end of this. For the PRs to be approved, what's your process for that? Are you guys actually spinning up like an on-demand PR environment for that to test it, or is it just like a manual code review? How does it get approved to then be merged?
So the team I worked with at the time, we decided on different levels of things that needed approval, right? It was, some of it was risk-based, some of it was, magnitude of change-based, but we tried to make it so that the bare minimum stuff actually needed a PR. Sometimes, if it was somebody who was really, really new, theirs would get reviewed maybe for the first 2 to 3 months, but after that, it was just based on the categorization that we had come up with, and when you made your PR, it went into that category because they had to indicate on the PR which one it was, so it would do some automated filtering. But it wasn't that anyone sat and had to look at each one, and then too, on a rotating basis, this was some people's favorite job, and I say that not sincerely. Maybe for each week rolling, someone had to have eyes on to make sure that those big ones that did come through actually were picked up pretty quickly. We tried the thing where, a certain person is assigned to do the review, but it quickly dropped their velocity like through the floor, trying to go in, review the PR, suggest changes, all of that. They really couldn't do work. So we moved more to something where if there was someone who did a similar type of work more often, they would be asked first because they could look at it more quickly, because they almost had sort of a intuition about it at that point, and they could go through it really fast, make recommendations really fast, and then turn it back if they had to. But those were the strategies we used.
Just add, one thing we work with our customers on is exactly having the preview environments. So whenever you commit, if let's say I want to share my code with you, or I added some new feature to the front end, I want you to be able to visualize it. I would then create a short-lived PR. The CI job would kick off, do all the testing. It would also spin up a short-lived environment that you could go look at. I could commit some changes, you could commit some changes. It would update that environment. And then once the PR is closed, that's all shut down. So definitely something that, if you've got the tooling around it, I think is definitely worth doing, because it just makes it so much more visual and easy to understand.
And are you doing that just for the front end stuff, or?
Yeah.
Thanks. You're talking about PR environment. Was that just for front end that you were doing it for, or the full stack?
Yes, you can do it full stack as well. It's just, it gets tricky depending on your environment, but if you have Helm charts that say, I've got my back end, it also spins up database, I can initialize some fake data. We do have people doing that full stack.
Sure.
It just depends on, it's some front end stuff I can use, mock service workers, things like that just totally fake out the back end, so it's not really needed. But yeah, depending on what you're doing, absolutely back end too. Thank you.
Comment from Edward, which basically syncs with what you were saying, Logan. For our org, we were looking into deploying a short-lived environment for a PR. We will then run QA automation on that environment, and the PR will get approved based on the outcome of that test, along with the usual peer approvals. So, yeah, that works out. I think we might almost be at time.
We're actually 5 minutes over.
We are. So we are at time. Thank you, everyone, for joining the session. Great having a conversation with you. And you can find Logan and I wandering around during the sessions or at the CloudBees booth. Or if you want to contact me or Logan on LinkedIn, please feel free. Thank you.